All right, it's 11:30, so we're going to get started. Wanted to welcome everybody to our 1099 webinar. We're going to help you with Acumatica 1099 processing for the changes in 2020. So my name's Arlene Welty. I'm a partner here at DataQuest. Our speaker and subject matter expert is my partner, Debbie Mazzula. Debbie started her career in public accounting as a CPA, and she was just telling me the background of this, of how she fell in love helping clients set up their accounting processes. After 9 years, she left the CPA firm and she started Mazzula Inc. to focus on her passion of helping businesses increase productivity through automation. And in 2018, she and her 3 partners formed DataQuest Solutions. And now Debbie works primarily with our Acumatica practice. Debbie lives in Maryland with her husband. She has 3 adult children and is a passionate lifelong learner. So thank you, Debbie, for doing this for us. So before Debbie jumps in, just a couple of community notes. I'm going to be putting our participants on mute for now. We're recording this and we will be sharing the recording with you for reference. And I'm just going to ask that you use the chat to send questions my way. I'll be facilitating getting questions over to Debbie. I just sent a chat out to everybody. If you see that, you can respond to everyone or you can test responding to me with questions. And we're also going to use some polling to make sure that we understand where everyone is coming from on this call. So look out for the polls. We'll be launching those throughout the call. Last comment, just a disclaimer, we're not tax advisors, so none of today's content should be considered that we're providing you tax advice. We'll ask that you contact your CPA firm if you have specific tax-related questions for your company. Our goal is to really help you understanding the new rules and helping you understand how to get your data out of Acumatica for your 1099 processing. So Debbie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arlene. I was thinking as you were introducing me, I should have said I have 3 adult children and a dog, because most people on this call have probably heard the dog barking in the background during all these Zoom calls we've had this year. So, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We really appreciate you joining us. And our goal today is to get you familiar with and prepared for complying with all of the 1099 reporting rules. So, and I hope that during the course of this, I can share something with you that you didn't know before. I'm a lifelong learner, so I always like to think I can add some nugget of value there. So here's the agenda that we're going to go through today, and what I hope that you will learn. So I'm not going to read you the whole agenda. I'll let you take a gander at that and make sure you're still interested. And while we're doing that, Arlene, would you put up our first poll so that we can see what these folks know about our the 1099 filing requirements and how they changed this year for 2020.
Okay, great. I'm starting to get some responses to the poll. Just let us know yes or no. All right. Okay, I'm going to share the results of that.
Oh, excellent. Well, I am very thrilled to be doing this then. That's wonderful. Makes me feel more important, guys. Thank you.
So we've got mostly no's and then a couple of yes, but wants more info.
Good. Excellent. Okay. So, changes in the law for 2020. I want to give you a little bit of history. I actually found this quite interesting. So prior to 1982, we had 2 separate forms, one for non-employee compensation and one for other types of reported payments. So in 2020, we're actually going back to pre-1982, and we're going to have 2 separate forms again. In 1982, the government decided to keep things simple, and they combined the forms so that we had non-employee compensation reported on the same form as the other types of payments like rent, royalties, all the other kind of payments that are reported on 1099s. So then in 2015, the Protecting Americans from Tax Hikes Act, the PATH Act, was passed. And the purpose of this, the reason this act was passed was because fraud in tax filing was becoming much more prevalent, and it was becoming a big problem. So this PATH Act was designed specifically to address tax fraud issues. One of them was the 1099 reporting. So with that act, the government escalated the filing due date of the 1099, the single 1099 form, depending on whether you had that box 7 non-employee compensation, you had amounts in that box or not. So you had two due dates for the one form. So the reason that they they escalated the due date for non-employee compensation to January 31st is so that they could match what people were reporting on their individual tax returns to what was being submitted on 1099 forms, because people were fraudulently not reporting things. So in 2015, we had a lot of confusion. One form, two due dates, people didn't know, there were penalties flying around, sort of court cases or mediation to not have penalties, and a lot of misunderstanding. It wasn't working the way IRS intended, so in 2020, we are now going back to a separate form with different due dates for your non-employee compensation. That's the new form, and then the existing 1099 miscellaneous. So what I hope to do is, further explain these two forms. Okay, rules regarding whom to send a 1099 to. So now that we, any vendor that, now that we know what forms we have to send this year, to whom do we send them? So any vendor that is paid while performing in your trade or business, if the vendor is an unincorporated business and if the total payments during the calendar year exceed the threshold. So the threshold is $600 for non-employee compensation and rent, and it's $10 for royalties. And there's a few other thresholds that aren't very popular, but all the rules are, in there for the 1099s. Employees typically do not get a 1099 non-employee compensation by definition, right? They are employees, so they don't get a 1099 non-employee compensation. C Corps, S Corps, and LLCs treated as either a C Corp or an S Corp are exempt. You do not have to file a 1099 for them. The IRS is getting a lot more serious about these 1099 being filed. So in addition to potential penalties for not filing a 1099, which starts at $50 a 1099, it starts depending on how many days you're late filing. In addition to the penalty, they also might, under audit, not allow you the deduction at all on your tax return. So it's getting serious that we need to pay attention to this. So the W-9 is used to request taxpayer identification numbers and to help you know who you need to send a 1099 to and file with the IRS. The taxpayer identification number, TIN, is generally a Social Security number or a employer identification number, EIN. You can also put an ITIN. People who can't get a Social Security number, they're not legitimate for a Social Security number, can apply for an ITIN, individual taxpayer identification number, and they can be used on a 1099, but they can't be used on a W-2. If you can't get a W-9, you are required to collect backup withholding and remit that backup withholding to the IRS. You do not have to collect a W-9 or send a 1099 to public companies, publicly held companies. A best practice is to always collect a W-9 from each vendor you do business with before you pay them. We suggest that you have some sort of vendor onboarding program so that before you make an initial payment to a vendor, you have a process of collecting the W-9 and other information like, payment terms, payment methods, and vendor terms, other pertinent information. So Arlene, let's do our next polling question and find out how people are getting the information that they need.
All right. Good to have a couple more responses. Our question is, do you have a vendor onboarding process? I got some yeses, some nos, and some sort of. All right, getting a couple more responses here. Thanks, folks. All right, there we go. All right, I'm gonna share the results. We've got mostly yes, some no, and some sort of. Sort of balance each other out.
Okay. So here's the W-9 now on my screen. This is what you can get it from, irs.gov, and you can send it to all of your vendors. Notice that box 3 here is what tells you whether you have to file a 1099 on behalf of this vendor or not. So we said you don't for C's and C Corps and S Corps and limited liabilities that tell you they are taxed as a corporation or a sub S. But everybody else you should be filing it for. So it's really good to get, and here's their information, their social security or employer identification. So this is the magic form that tells you what you need to do. And I just want to emphasize that it's really never too late to send this form out to your vendors. Doesn't matter if you've been doing business with them for years. You can say, hey, the rules changed, the law changed. We need this form from you to continue doing business with you. So give me this information. Okay. Moving on. So what is included in, I think I skipped a.
Right, there you go.
I did. Okay, so here's our new 1099 NEC. Let's take a look at this. Pretty nice and clean, right? One box does have for the dollar amount, does have the federal income tax withheld if you're forced to withhold income tax because you don't have their information. This box right here, this number 1 non-employee compensation, just replaces the miscellaneous box 7 on the 1099, sorry, the non-employee compensation box 7 on the 1099 MISC. So pretty simple, nice, clean form for 2020 for the 1099 NEC. Which probably, I mean, in my experience, in all my years of helping people with 1099s, the great majority of the 1099s that are produced are 1099 NECs. So what's included in the non-employee compensation? What amount do you put on that form in that box 1? So payments made for services performed by a non-employee, including parts and materials and reimbursed expenses. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. Fees, commissions, prizes, awards, payments to an attorney, but not gross proceeds. I'm going to talk about that in a minute as well. So these amounts are what goes in that box 1 on your 1099. And 2 frequent misconceptions are one is about the reimbursed expenses part, the parts or materials. So should they be included or not? Some people have always thought, well, they shouldn't be because it's not non-employee compensation. It's for the purchase of parts and materials or reimbursed expenses. But that's not necessarily true. For the most part, they should be included. 100% of what you pay a vendor should be included. And The only time it isn't included is if you have what the IRS calls as an accountability plan, meaning that they submit to you receipts for those parts and materials and reimbursed expenses, proving that they are business expenses. So remember that the whole goal of the government is to be able to match gross income on on reported 1099s, gross income on your 1040s, 1065s, the tax returns, to the total of the 1099s that are being reported. So because gross income would include those reimbursed expenses, and then they would expense the parts and materials and expenses, they should actually be included on your 1099, again, unless you have an accountability plan. The second misconception that I think happens is the payments to an attorney. So now on a 1099 NEC, any like legal services in the normal course of your trade or business, if anything you do with an attorney, those services and fees should be reported on the 1099 NEC, but not gross proceeds. And we'll see that on the 1099 miscellaneous, where if there was a proceeds on like a contingent case or an award winning on a legal case, then that goes in a different place. So Arlene, can we do the next polling question and find out how many 1099s people anticipate needing to file in 2020, for 2020?
Okay, so we have how many 1099s will you be required to file? We've just got a couple brackets if folks can let us know what your expectation is. Okay, thanks. I'm going to share the results. So we've got 57% less than 50, 29% 51 to 249, and 14% 250 plus.
Okay, great. We're going to see this later, but the reason that we broke it into those categories is because 250 or more, you are required to e-file. So we'll talk about that a little more. There we go. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and look at our 1099 miscellaneous for 2020. So here we have it, a little messier. Things moved a lot. Box 1 through 6 is in the same place, but 7, because it used to be the non-employee compensation, below that everything sort of shifted. And we see that the box 14, gross proceeds paid to an attorney, are if there was a settlement, not fees, but a settlement, and those would be considered gross proceeds. They are part of that settlement, is gross proceeds paid to the attorney. Okay, I'm just going to reemphasize. If you guys have any questions, please put it in the chat, and we'll get to them to the extent I can answer them. We'll get to them at the end. Okay. So filing requirements. I mentioned that if you are required to e-file, if that means electronically file with IRS, if you have 250 or more 1099s, it is always an option to file, e-file, either the 1099 NEC or the 1099 MISC, even if you only have one. Kind of a hassle to print these forms and the related 1096, which and mail them and get them postmarked. So you can always e-file, which is becoming more prevalent. The 1096 is not required to be e-filed. If you e-file, it's a natural product of your e-filing of the file you're sending. If you file via USPS, the United States Postal Service, so you print and file, it is allowed for less than 250 1099s, and the copy A is the actual copy that goes to the IRS with the paper form, and it must be accompanied by a 1096. I just want to touch on right here on truncating your TIN. So for a lot of times in the mail, for the protection of Social Security numbers and employer identification numbers and ITINs. You've seen, I'm sure, just the last 4 digits. So you see like asterisks in the first 5 digits of a number, and then just the last, that's called truncating TINs. You can always do that on the recipient's copy when you're mailing it, but you cannot on the electronic. Obviously, the IRS needs to see the entire number. And your employer identification number that goes on the 1099 can't be truncated. It always has to be in full. Let's do another polling question. Let's find out how everybody filed last year.
All right, how did you produce and file your 1099s for 2019? A couple options here, whether you printed copies in-house, e-filed, used a third party. I'm going to share those results.
Okay, so the single largest one is that you did it in-house.
Right, and then filed a paper copy.
Yep, excellent. Okay, so let's talk about due dates for the filing. Notice the 1099 NEC column, nice and simple. Everything due on the same date, which is February 1st this year, because January 31st falls on a weekend. So whether the copy to the recipient, the copy to the IRS, and no matter whether you're doing paper or e-filing, it's all due on the same day. 1099 miscellaneous, a little more complicated. The recipient still must get it by January 31st or February 1st. That's because IRS is trying to match those up with the 1040s and the 1065s that are coming in, the tax returns. So they still need to, the recipient still needs to get it. And then you file paper filing to the IRS and the e-file to the IRS. You get a reprieve. You get until March 31st. Okay, so let's go into Acumatica and take a look at how Acumatica helps us with compliance for 1099 reporting and how we can get them out of Acumatica. So first of all, we have to configure. So we have some configuration steps. We have to enable. Under our enable, we have enable features. And here we have, oh, I hope I didn't time out, good. We have a little checkbox under standard financials that says we are doing 1099 reporting. And then once you turn that on, Acumatica establishes all those 1099 boxes for you. Now, Acumatica is still referring to the box number, but it is fully aware and compliant with all the new reporting. So we just have these pre-established. I don't know when you would ever need to add, a new one, but you could if you needed to add some other category. So if things change. On the companies tab, then we need to give it all the information for printing it. So on our companies, whether our companies are, we all know in Acumatica, power of having branches that have their own reporting, or companies that cover multiple branches and report. We're very flexible in that setup. So in the company itself, under the 1099 settings, we have, here we have a box on the company details. We have a box that says what level is the 1099 reporting at? Is it at the branch level, or is it at the entity level? I'm just flipping through different branches here so you can see it. And then all of this information as far as oh, by the way, I just want to say, you see this says MISC. This is the setting for NEC, 1099 NEC as well. The 1099 information is going to pull the name and address and that information from the company details. So you want to be sure that they're all filled in accurately. And then on the 1099 settings tab, you have some more information for e-filing settings. So if you have, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but a transmitter control code for e-filing, you fill it in here, and this is all the information that would go with your your file that is created for e-filing. So next we need to set our vendors up to say which vendors need 1099 reporting. So I've got 2 vendors in here that are that we've got set up for 1099. So on the general tab here, we have a little checkbox that says this is a 1099 vendor, and then we have what box is that is the default box for the 1099 payments, for any payment to this vendor. On the purchase setting tab, we have their tax registration ID. So this would be their social security number or their taxpayer identification number or that individual taxpayer identification number, that ITIN. So, and I just, a best practice, I'll just pull another one up that is, whoops, I wanted to do it here. This is the vendor for rent. So we can see here on the general tab, this one is for rents instead of for non-employee compensation. And I thought I attached a W-9 up here. You know, Acumatica's power is in being able to attach files and notes and all of that. So I would strongly encourage you to attach the W-9 as you receive them from your vendors. That way you have sort of proof of exactly what you've selected, whether they get a 1099 or not. So now we're all set up. We've got our configuration all done. And, you know, once it's configured properly, Acumatica will keep track of all the information that you need automatically. As you know, 1099 reporting is based on the calendar year. So it's not when you put a bill in. It's when you pay that bill, and Acumatica takes care of tracking all of that information. So as soon as you put the first, you know, 1099 payment in, a bill payment that is for a 1099 bill, it will establish the calendar year for your 1099 filing. I'd like to show you then, let's just enter a bill. And I'm going to use Riverbuild, which is the vendor that we pay rent to, just as an example. And we'll just say this is December rent, or we'll say this is January rent. Okay, and we'll come down here and we'll just put in and you can see here that it automatically defaulted to what this vendor is set up with for what 1099 box. I also just want to say that you can form a relationship between your general ledger accounts and your 1099 box in that accounts payable preferences, but that's totally optional. So if you know, this should always be rent and you may split the rent between more than one GL account, that's fine. But if it's always that your subcontractors go to one GL account and you always want that to be, you know, that non-employee compensation box, then you can form that relationship. Notice that on this detail line, there is no, there's no 1099 amount. So the entire amount here is going to be put in that box on the 1099. If you need to have a different amount, then you'd have to create, you know, more than one row and take out the box, so it's not being reported on a 1099. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and release this just so I can show you something a little bit later. So let's talk about, though, what happens if during the year you discover that you've been paying a 1099 vendor like Riverbuild. Let's say we didn't realize that we Wow, we didn't realize that we needed to do a 1099 for Riverbuild, and we've been paying them every month. We've been paying them, you know, all along. So we, what do we do about that? How do we go back and say all the payments we want to be 1099 payments? So this is really nice. I like this feature of Acumatica. Once you have established a vendor as a 1099 vendor, you can come back in to closed, released bills, and you can still get into this 1099 box and say, you know, this one should be included on the 1099. So you can still do that after the fact. So what you need to do is, you know, make sure you flag all of your vendors as 1099 vendors, and then come back through and fill in that box. If you have a lot of them, that actually can be done as an import scenario, just to let you know. So that's really it, right? At this point, you are tracking, and again, it goes on a bill, but Acumatica behind the scenes is saying, when did this bill get paid? That's the year that it's going to be put on the 1099 itself. Okay, so let's look at some of the reports that you have. We've actually got quite a few, quite good reporting on the 1099 here. This 1099 vendor history will show you what is going to, box by box, what's going to show up. So if I click the finder here, these are all my 1099 vendors. I'm not seeing every vendor, just my 1099 vendors. So, and I can select vendor by vendor and go through looking by tax year and see what they're going to have, what's going to be included on the 1099. So I can just arrow through these and see, you know, what's going to be recorded. If you've been on Acumatica for a number of years, you can go backwards, and Acumatica even is savvy to the fact that what box it should have been on for prior years. So let's look at a couple other reports that sort of gives you that history, but we've got this 1099 year summary, and we've got a detail report. Both are which are nice. So let's go into, let's run this report. So this is a summary of 1099's miscellaneous that's going to be reported. And then we've got a detail report, which actually shows both this one is for whether it's an NEC or a miscellaneous. Here we go, this is rents. So this would be on a miscellaneous form, but you can select to just run it for one or the other. And there's one other really nice report here, and that is the open 1099 payments. So at the end of the year, if you have a bill in the system that is 1099 bill, like that that rent payment for January, and it hasn't been paid yet, so I should be able to run a report and see all of my bills that have not been, that are open. What's open on a 1099 hasn't been paid yet. So that's the purpose of this report. So for printing, here up at top, we have the forms. So printing, you're printing your miscellaneous form or your 1099 NEC form here. And of course, IRS requires that you print on their form. No company is allowed to do pre-printed forms like we can with W-2s and some other government reports. You have to buy the forms themselves. They have to be that red copy form that you saw in my print screen, and you have to buy them from your form supply store or from, your office supply store. They're out there now already. So, so this is what they look like. They're the 2-up form. It's a standard form, and they would print out. And here's your NEC form. That doesn't really, look like too much when it's not the pre-printed form. But here are the 2 that were non-employee compensation. And at the end, I've got my 1096 information, the totals. And when you're printing, you need to complete that 1096. So this is where, just to reiterate, your recipients, if you're printing and mailing to your recipients, you print them here. And you can also print on the copy of the form that is for IRS, the copy A, and send it to IRS. So you're printing them multiple times, right? Once for the recipient copy, once for your copy, once for the IRS copy, or for the IRS copy, you can create the e-file. And this is where you create the e-file. So when you process all here, it will create that file. Wherever you save it, that's the file you would upload to the IRS. So let's talk about that for a minute. When you send to the IRS, the way you upload it is on their website. It's called fire.irs.gov. That's where you upload your files, and you must have a transmitter control code, so a TCC code, and you need to apply for that TCC code in advance. They send it to you in the mail. We're getting sort of beyond the date to apply for that, but you can still try. IRS is aware, sort of using slow mail as an excuse. You can call, and I don't have the number on my little cheat sheet here, but I can get you the telephone number. Once you've applied, you have to apply at fire.irs.gov, and then you can, wait a little bit and call and say, hey, I didn't get it yet. Have you assigned me a taxpayer control number? And that number, as we saw before, goes on the company setting. You tell it your taxpayer control number. Another option potentially is to export the e-file, to upload the e-file to a service, to a 1099 service. And I don't know, on that poll we took, maybe some people are using a service like we use a lot of times we use Atrix, and you could upload it there and let them do all your e-filing for you. So that is pretty much it as far as covering everything in Acumatica. Oh, I guess sorry, I forgot to mention one thing, and that is that you can also close the 1099 year. So once you've produced those 1099s, you really don't want them to change. So you can close the year, and that makes it so you can't make changes to that 1099 values on those boxes. So that wraps it up, and I'm going to stop my share. And so I just want to talk a little bit about how DataQuest can help. We certainly recognize that this is a once a year task, and it is a task that comes up at the busiest time of the year for all you guys in accounting, and we want to help however we can help you. So we're here to help with whatever aspect of this you think that we can be of service. We do ask that you try to prepare and schedule in advance with us to help us be sure we give good service for you. let's take our last polling question, Arlene. Actually,
okay, so our last question is if you're anticipating help to produce your 1099s, you can let us know. Okay, all right, thanks all. We got some yes, some no, some not sure, call me to discuss. That totally makes sense. So Deb, can I wrap up with a couple questions
please.
and some feedback?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Okay, so I got a couple questions during the call that I want to bring up, and I'll also point people to the chat. I just put a link in the chat on where you can sign up on Debbie's calendar, or you can always send something into support@dquest.com to make sure that you're in our queue so that we're sure to help you with your 1099s. Okay, Debbie, you're in the hot seat now. I've got a couple chat questions that came in. Okay. I'll also just say to the group, if there's anything you found particularly helpful today, feel free to chat that as well, just so we have feedback on how this information was today.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if anyone learned anything.
Okay, so one of my first questions is, okay, we've got a vendor in Canada. How do we handle something like an international form for that vendor?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that you contact your accountant and find out on international, because there are different situations for different scenarios of exactly where they're working, what they're doing, etc. So I think that's a question that belongs to a tax advisor. Sorry.
Okay. How do I adjust the 1099 amount if I notice that it's wrong?
So if the vendor has been set up as a 1099 vendor, and that bill is in the system, then you can, as I showed you, go back into that bill and change the amount of the breakout on the lines that you to reflect what you need it to reflect on the 1099.
Okay. Okay. Another question is, where do you confirm within the system if you e-filed previously?
I don't think that you do. I think you would have to go to fire.irs.gov, and in there's a history of your account. You get a login, a user ID, a password, a passcode, a PIN. There's like 4 different ways of authenticating, and then you see all your history.
Okay.
I don't think Acumatica tells you, if that's what the question was.
Okay. Right. Okay. Good. So I'm going to wrap up unless there's any last minute questions. I'll just let everyone know that we recorded this, so we'll be blogging this and we'll send it out so you can use it as a reference. And to copy what you see in the chat there, if you anticipate wanting to get on Debbie's calendar, grab that now. And we're going to end with an appreciation. So thanks everyone for joining. Definitely appreciate you, and hope we can help you with your 1099s this year if you need. Oh, one more question, last minute question. One last question, Debbie, just confirming we don't need to change box numbers.
No, you do not need to. That is the confirmation is yes, you do not need to change box numbers. Okay. You don't need to do anything.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks everyone for attending. Definitely appreciate you. Thank you, Debbie, for your expertise. Definitely appreciate all that you shared today. So thanks all, and bye-bye for now.